This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop game day faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hi everybody and welcome to the Writers on Film podcast. My name's John Bleasdale. I am a film critic and writer, and today I'm going to be talking to Ian Nathan. Ian has written a number of books, including The Alien Vault, a book on Ridley Scott, and just frankly too many to mention. The book we're going to be looking at today, and the reason I'm talking to him today, is because he wrote the definitive account of the making of Lord of the Rings, and which also serves as a kind of biography of Peter Jackson as well. There's several reasons for doing this. There's the anniversary of Lord of the Rings, of Fellowship of the Ring, coming up. There is also a new Peter Jackson documentary miniseries on Disney Plus, which has just come out. Ridley Scott, of course, has 2 films in cinemas relatively close together, The House of Gucci and The Last Duel. So we're going to be talking about loads of those things. It's a pretty long conversation, and I've put it as a sort of, I'm putting it out as a kind of bonus episode. Ian is great to talk to. I think he's one of those people who I could watch it, I could listen to him for hours, you know, and so, which we don't do, I hasten to add. I mean, it's a long conversation, it's not that long. If you enjoy the conversation, please remember to like, spread the word, publicize the podcast, print t-shirts off, wear them at popular sporting events, do embarrassing things, get viral videos going, skywrite with biplanes. Do what you can. If you want to, you can follow me on Twitter at drjonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation.
Radio reviews, week by week, and I was getting a bit frustrated. Radio's fine, but you come away thinking, I've not said anything. I've sort of just top-lined everything. And new Ridley Scott looks very pretty, controversial subject. So I wanted to get into just, I had other views on it I just wanted to express. And that's why I kind of started just doing the Substack. I don't know how often I'll keep it up because it takes quite a lot of work. But obviously I wanted to write about Ridley's new film because I've written a book about Ridley and I'm very passionate about Ridley. And so every time he puts a film out, I kind of engage. And as like you said, I thought on one level I was really impressed and I really liked it. And I think we're so casual about how hard it is to mount that kind of film on that kind of level with that kind of authenticity. And to do it at the age of 83 as if it was nothing, okay, medieval France, kings, dueling, all of these things, castles, really just does it without almost blinking. And in the middle of a pandemic as well, they had to shut down that production and then restart it again months and months later. That to me was phenomenal. As a film, I liked it a lot, but I had certain reservations. What I liked actually was the Rashomon element to it. The three stories are testimonies to one court case. It's a courtroom drama, really, at heart, although there's all the paraphernalia of the medieval, but it's about the case and how it represents. And I thought the modern points it wants to sort of infer about Me Too and the current world were more tellingly made, I think, in the two male stories, Carouge and Legree, because they were so stupid and they were so arrogant, and even with Legree especially. And I thought Driver was absolutely terrific in the film because he wouldn't even consider it rape. He wouldn't even, because the society works in such a way that he could do what he liked, and it was as much a sexual thing as a power thing over Carouge, and to sort of work his way upwards with the wonderful Ben Affleck. It's kind of the liege lord they respond to. And I thought that was the kind of telling point, that Scott was kind of making. The reflection of society now and society then may not be that different. We see that as barbaric. Actually, what has changed? And I thought that was very powerfully done, that kind of elusiveness and the way those two characters worked. I thought Jodie Comer was great in it, but I thought as soon as it becomes her testimony is the truth, and it tells us that, the caption hangs on to the word truth, lets us grasp that, rather than let us feel that through her testimony as if she were in court. It kind of became didactic to me. It started to tell me things rather than let me feel them and understand them, and just lost me a bit. And I started to look forward to the duel to come. I started to just wanted that stuff, and it just doesn't mean to sort of downplay her performance, because she was magnetic in it and in each of the kind of segments. But that idea of repeating things from different points of view started to wear a bit thin by the third one. But I don't know, what did you think about that?
No, I really rated it. I really and I'm really sort of disappointed with the critical and the it's commercially it's flopped. Critically, it's kind of been very meh, and there's a lot of sort of cheap shots about the mullets. And I get it, yeah, they're wearing mullets, what are you going to do? What do you do with that sort of stuff? It just seems I think it seems like they're more against sort of Matt Damon and Ben Affleck appearing in a period piece. They don't want to even engage in it. Whereas I thought they were both brilliant, and I thought they were both kind of brave performances. I mean, Matt Damon plays someone who is increasingly a shit, and his heroism that he sets up at the beginning is totally deconstructed by the halfway through, really, and certainly by the end. He's quite a deplorable character. The Driver, I agree, was brilliant. Ben Affleck, I mean, Tom Schoen, we had a discussion on an episode earlier, and he called it one of his greatest pleasures of 2021 was watching Ben Affleck and how funny it was. And I would be, I definitely agree with that.
Affleck is so rarely credited for being so good at pompous. I don't even remember Shakespeare in Love, which is quite an odious film in many ways. But Ben Affleck is just fantastic in that film as the kind of A-list Shakespearean actor who kind of waltzes in going, what is the play and what is my part? And he just lifts the spirit of the film and gives it something. And he does the same in The Last Duel. When you start to worry it's going to be grim and serious the whole way through, as soon as he comes on screen, and the withering looks he gives Matt Damon, they are ironic and they are a little bit meta, but it's a great pleasure, as Tom said, just to take part in that and join in. And he sort of lifts the burden of the film a bit and says, well, we can laugh at these ludicrous men and the world around them. And I love I don't know who she is, who plays his silent wife, who just has this kind of trade in kind of glances toward her husband of utter hatred. This is a dead marriage that he did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those touches in a way, I thought Scott was much more, he said a lot more with those kind of little incidental details than he did with the kind of hammer blow of the main point. Sometimes we forget, and I think he forgets a bit, that the subtle gesture, the storytelling actually could be a much greater vessel for message making than just saying it to the audience.
It reminds me a little bit of Stephen King's novels. Stay with me here because this is good.
Okay.
This is a stretch. There's always a moment in every Stephen King novel, or more or less everyone, where you have the setup and it's great, and you have the middle bit where there's a build up of stuff, and that's really good. And then you always have a scene where like the main goody characters kind of come together, usually in a kitchen, and someone brings beer. And they discuss. So you're saying this is and they all have to sort of believe in the supernatural at this point and be convinced.
Yeah.
And then they become the gang which is going to save the world or do whatever they have to do. And at that point, I always kind of lose interest because it's just like he's not very good at writing good people. He's not.
Yeah.
He's good with wickedness and evil. And I did get that with the Jodie Comer part of the film where she didn't need to be that good. It was almost like the point of Me Too isn't that good girls are being, it's that any girl is being mistreated. And so, the fact that she's like a forward thinker and she reads books and she's got this forward thinking about agriculture, I just found some of those were the worst scenes when she sort of says to the peasant, you do what you let the horses run around, and it's just like, oh, really? Animal husbandry as the moral indicator of who I should like. Yeah. That bit, I agree with you. I think that was the weakest bit, and it is a pedantic point, I think, to make when the accomplishment is otherwise so complete. And that last duel, it lives up to its title. It really delivers.
Absolutely, and it's so quick. I mean, and Scott would have read the histories. He would have the historians in, and they would have known this is how they worked. But that idea of weight is fantastic. Armor is just hideous. They're like sort of drunk bears just trying to move to get to one another. It's kind of like, it's unbearably exhausting to George. It's not glamorous or exciting. It's just hard, I think. And he really gets that across.
And I mean, even the line that Comer says of, it's two old men. I'm waiting for.
And all those little, I love the little, but we've got those little sort of memories of battle. Yeah, it's just, and it's the stupidity of it all in the end. Machismo, and here they are, they're literally knocking chunks out of each other, for the sake of their own position in court, or their own dignity, their own pride, and they condemn themselves. That's what the film does very powerfully. It's how the men condemn themselves in our eyes as the audience, and they don't know it because they're medieval men. They're just doing what they do in medieval society, but we can see it, and that's the powerful thing. How it reflects on today is then we start to think, God, are we like that, as men, even on whatever level, but are we still processing things in a similar way? We think our position in society is impregnable. And it was for those guys, apart from against each other. And that becomes interesting. I did like as well the kind of little credit, the little kind of stings at the end, that Carouge, he wins the duel, but 2 years later he's dead.
Yeah,
that's the medieval world, and she'd never married again. I thought that was quite funny.
I love the king as well, the little boy king.
Oh yes, Alex Lawler, isn't it? Alex Lawler, and yeah, he just, it's the whole thing's a game, and it's delightful. Oh, they're going to duel, and he's all really excited about it. And even his young queen, she starts to get annoyed with him because he says men dueling. Some of it isn't that subtle, and Ridley, sometimes can be quite unsubtle with things, but he's still, no one else is making films with that kind of ambition and scale and stardom, and for Fox and Disney to kind of throw it away a bit, I don't think they knew what to do with it. And maybe we are in a bit of a post-COVID world where you've got to be a big sensational thing for people to come out to cinemas. And maybe with House of Gucci coming down the line, even Ridley's people couldn't, muster the energy to put it in place. But I hope it gets rediscovered and put amongst, his great medieval films, which tend to grow on you over time.
Where would you put it in his sort of filmography? Where, in terms of your personal pantheon?
My personal pantheon, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's not the duelists. And it's maybe in terms of the historical ones, it's less of an epic than you think, because it's quite an intimate story, even though it's historical France, and we get the landscapes and we get the kind of castles, but it's not Kingdom of Heaven, which sort of takes on the Crusades, or 1492, which does Columbus, and in a similar time frame. Actually, it's amazing that Columbus was just around the corner, crossing the world and trying to see the future. So I put it lower. I probably put it mid-tier. And again, I don't want to ever take Ridley for granted, and I think too many people do. And there's too many, as you said, there's all these kind of reviews that were just kind of, oh, Ridley doing medieval things again, how tiresome. And you think, well, what is it you want from films? What do you think they should be doing? Taking us to another world and making points and great performances. But in terms of my own personal pantheon, maybe sort of, I don't know, 10th or 11th, somewhere mid-tier. But I've only seen it once, and I do want to go back and look. I'm sure there's nuance I'll pick up again.
Yeah, I saw it twice, and because I took my daughter to see it actually,
Yeah.
and she loved it. She thought it was great. I mean, she's 17 years old,
right?
So
right.
she's yeah. I don't know. I don't really know. She's coming at it quite fresh, I think. But I mean, my feeling for it was, I thought it was his best film probably since Gladiator, or even since Thelma and Louise. I was really, I think I felt it was that big for me, that it was, maybe if I rewatch some other films, Kingdom of Heaven, for instance, I've only watched the director's cut once, and maybe I need to watch that again. But my problem with Kingdom of Heaven is just that vacancy in the star role. Wonderful film, which it's the On Her Majesty's Secret Service of Ridley's films.
Yeah, it's too true. It's everything about it's right, apart from the leading man. I do love The Martian. I don't know if you said when the last time we saw The Martian, because it's a rare sighting of Ridley being fun. And Damon is very good at that. Temperature. That's why he's so good in Last Duel, because he works so against his normal persona. But he's very good in The Martian, all those direct-to-camera things. And
I think the Martian. Comedy. Yeah, it sort of struck me as almost too facile, and I don't mean that in a bad way necessarily. Yeah. But it's almost like it didn't. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching it, but it was almost like it was a film which was taking on some of the sort of energy and rhythms of reality TV. Like there's a bit where they build something and they do it in sort of speeded up time, and you think, God, you'd see that on like a decorating program or something where
And the other one I do really like in recent times is All the Money in the World, which I think is a great film about wealth. I think we were talking about this last time, wealth and class, and a great Christopher Plummer performance, and Michelle Williams, I just think, is impeccable in that film. And this battle of wills between a mother and a grandfather who just curdled with his wealth.
Have you seen House of Gucci?
Not yet. I'm going to see it at the beginning of next week, I think. And
because I was thinking that looks like a similar sort of area, of Italy and wealthy sort of misbehavior.
The critical response coming out of the premiere was strange. It seemed to be people loving it for its madness and its chaos, and I couldn't work out whether some reviews loved it or hated it. They kind of it seems to be an all over the place kind of film. But he said it's a soap opera. It's just kind of, and he wants that feel to it, which is going to be new for him. A kind of people picture and sort of butting heads, and there's a lot of discussion about Lady Gaga's accent, isn't there? I think someone said it sounded more Russian than Italian, but I'm up for it. If it makes me laugh, I'm very up for it.
What was your take on The Counselor? Because that's I've heard that name checked as one of the films. It sort of is in that area.
It's a film I struggle with. I mean, I'm a big Cormac McCarthy fan, and obviously a big Ridley fan. And the news that they were working together, sounded great. We'd had No Country for Old Men, and it seemed to be an ideally placed proposition. It's a screenplay by Cormac McCarthy, but sometimes there's the two things don't quite fit together as much as you think they will. And I don't know, I struggle with it. And it's got a great reputation. It's one of those films that a large pocket of film critics really defend and say it's a dark comedy. It's about the devil. It's about nature of evil, and you got to look at it on certain levels. But I struggled to love it. And I struggle to laugh at it as well if it is a comedy. And Scott says it's a comedy. The whole kind of mad stuff with Cameron Diaz and Javier Bardem, this kind of, they almost look like footballers' wives stuff. It's kind of quite mad. And I've watched it twice, and I do like things about it. At the same time, I struggle with it because I could see they shot bits in London, pretending they're Texas, and I can see that, that's Hoxton Bar and Grill. I've been there. That annoyed me, which is not a thing you should judge a film from because they all cheat. But its grimness is almost overpowering at times, and by the end, when it's Ruben Neves or who gives I can't remember the actor at the end, he gives the big speech to Fassbender about evil, and he's kind of Satan, and the kind of the absurdity it gets to of watching a DVD of your fiance meeting a terrible fate just seemed slightly ridiculous to me. It got to a point where this is no longer a film I can quite believe in.
Yeah, no, I have similar feelings, and I think it's funny, that idea as well, that you sometimes have too perfect a marriage of people. It's like David Cronenberg did The Naked Lunch. It's like, or David Cronenberg doing Ballard. I just sort of think you're almost too, your sensibilities are too attuned. You sort of cancel each other out.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I'd rather have seen Ridley's Blood Meridian. He was planning to do Blood Meridian, but Blood Meridian has very little redeeming qualities in terms of morality in it. It's an extraordinary, snapshot of the Old West as this kind of place of biblical violence. But I think he grew shy of it because you're just going to beat people up by showing them that relentless amount of violence, brutality, and the darkest places mankind can go to. You're like, oh yes, 2 tickets for Saturday night, please. I think he realized that might be too much, but I would love to have seen it. To have gone to that place with that Ridley eye on the Cormac McCarthy's Old West.
Yeah, absolutely. And really Peckinpah country as well, because it's sort of crossing the border to Mexico and back again all the time. So let's get on to Peter Jackson and Lord of the Rings as well. It seems like I was struggling to think of a segue, but I just completely failed.
It's epic to the epic, I suppose. And I've had discussions about Ridley Scott with Jackson.
What does he think?
Well, Jackson, of course, he's a consummate geek about all things, and he's got this huge movie collection of like memorabilia, and literally is the props and costumes. It's incredible. I've wandered around it a couple of times, and he's got like all the original costumes from the Sound of Music. He's got all the original makeup from Planet of the Apes. He bids for this stuff. And it's like, what happens if the geek becomes a billionaire? What can he spend his money? No, he doesn't collect action figures. He collects the original figures from the movies. The original Thunderbirds. He's just got all this stuff. But he has the derelict, the original model built by Giger and his team of the derelict in Alien. And I'd written about Alien at that time when we were talking. I said, I'm talking about my book. And he goes, come and see the derelict. Yeah, I've got the derelict. It's only Peter Jackson would say that.
Jesus.
They opened up this giant crate, and there's the derelict, looking a little derelict. In fact, I gave him a copy of my book. I sent it to him because he wanted to see pictures of how the derelict, so they could mend it. And then he was quite funny. And like most people, I think his take on Ridley was he loves Blade Runner and Alien and Gladiator. And I think I spoke to him shortly after Alien Covenant and Scott had said he'd shot at Milford Sound, because he'd heard it was unreachable and untouchable. He said not even Jackson could shoot there. And I said this to Jackson. Ridley said you couldn't shoot. He says, no, I could shoot there if I wanted to shoot there. So we just didn't want to because it's too much of a tourist attraction. Everyone would have known it's Milford Sound. He was a bit kind of defensive about it. Don't come to New Zealand and tell me where I can't shoot, Ridley Scott. He was laughing about it.
Right.
And he's a great admirer of Scott's, of course. But it was just funny. There was a little bit of sort of directorial rivalry. Scott wanted to score points over Jackson. And Jackson wasn't having it.
But he's got such a sort of unique journey, Jackson, into making movies. He doesn't see. I think it's a lot of it, and I think you emphasize this. In the book, that it's his geographical location. It's just the fact they're so isolated and they're so that he just has to make it up himself, and that becomes his sort of modus operandi right the way through.
Absolutely, and this was something I was endeavoring to capture because they all talk about it, and it's not just Jackson. It's a New Zealand thing. They live at the end of the world, and they said sort of as the country developed, if their machinery broke down, it would take them 6 months to get replacement parts because they're too far from anywhere. So they had to fix things without knowing how. And it became known as this number 8 wire was the saying they had for it. Number 8 wire was a kind of fencing wire that was used to fix anything. You know, your combine harvester broke down, you just got number 8 wire out and sort of put it together and you coped. And this was how they got by and how they actually achieved. And it became the joke that they actually made Lord of the Rings using number 8 wire. They just figured out a way of doing it miles away from anywhere else. But it's so true, as you say, of how Jackson became a filmmaker. He lived in small seaside town in New Zealand, miles from anywhere. They got films 6 months, 8 months, a year later before anyone else. And he was a movie obsessive who wanted to be a filmmaker. But there's no film school to go to. There's no chance to fly into LA and go into the big universities there. That wasn't on the cards. So he sort of had to make it up the New Zealand way. And obviously that, as most people know, this is a great story of sort of shooting short films using his mother's oven to grow special effects and cutting up her first stall. She had a kind of collar still to make his King Kong, and he did it. He figured all these things out. He was trying to do a stop motion battle at one point between him, dressed as a kind of Sinbad-like character, and a skeleton. He was trying to figure all this out to narrate, because he obviously adored Ray Harryhausen. And he only filmed him fighting the invisible thing because he fell over in the surf and smashed his leg open and had to stop filming from there on. And that was his first attempt at a fantasy movie. He sort of was wary of them after that because it was kind of a lethal thing to be doing. But you come to Bad Taste, which is obviously the first Jackson film. And Lord of the Rings was a breeze compared to Bad Taste. It took them 4 years to finish Bad Taste, shooting at weekends, literally homemade stuff. He made a homemade Steadicam. He sort of invented it out of wood. He built cranes out of wood himself. He used his own car for shots. And gradually he got bits of more and more money as it went along with Bad Taste. And you can see him sort of hire other people, and production values start to creep up in the film. Even though it's incredibly kind of hand to mouth, is it?
Not that far. Yeah.
Not that far, but it's a kind of improvement when he gets the house that launches into space. And in fact, it's when Fran Walsh comes along, who would become his partner, but she was there then helping at that point. But 4 years, and the mindset, I think, to have, I'm going to do this, I'm going to finish this. He always tells that really lovely story about the lowest point he's ever been was making Bad Taste, and he'd gone out some location near where he lived, quite a kind of rugged location on the edge of a cliff, and his friends didn't show up. They go to play football, and they'd never shown up, and he cried, and he said, and I think it's about he was so in the moment of making this film, and it was so important to him that he realized it was breaking his heart a little bit, and he almost had to sort of rationalize himself and steel himself. And I like to think that moment gave him the strength to get all the way to the Oscars. In a way, it gave him the strength to get through Lord of the Rings and all the hurdles he'd have to overcome, just sort of coming to terms with what filmmaking was going to be for him. But always been that personal. I think he's never lost the passion.
There are so many hurdles. I mean, there are so many that, in terms of the rights, in terms of the various producers, and the Weinstein getting involved and being he could have been an enemy that sunk it completely. So there's just so much serendipity in it. Even like getting to the starting, and even when he gets to the start. The whole thing about them having to recast Aragorn within a week. It's the week they're filming, and they're right. Okay, who do we need?
Yeah, it's a fantastic. One of the strange things setting out to write the book was, one of the chief models was Final Cut, the Stephen Back book on the great disaster of Heaven's Gate.
Right.
I wanted to write the kind of or try and write the inverted version of Final Cut. It's a story of a triumph over adversity, which is a much harder book in some ways to write because everything goes well, after a certain point.
It's the Jodie Comer part of the last
It's
duel, isn't it?
Suddenly, like we're on message, and it's all. But it was that, and he's so good on that initial period. In fact, he's much better on getting to the starting line. And once you're talking about the actual filmmaking, it all becomes a bit more of a blur to him, and sort of day by day. But that journey from coming out of the Frighteners, and a lot of the motivation was A, he wanted to do a fantasy film, B, he needed to give Weta Digital and Weta Workshop work. He needed to employ these people because they were growing concerns, and he was the manager of it. So he needed to feed that beast. He'd come out of the Frighteners, which hadn't done very well, and then, as you know, King Kong fell over, and all the things, and other possibilities came and went. That they reached this point where one day he and Fran Walsh were having a discussion. I need to do a fantasy film, maybe a fantasy film we can do special effects. It's hilarious. And he kept going, I want to do a bit of this. And she went, that's Lord of the Rings. I want to do a bit of this. That's Lord of the Rings. And he'd read it like 15 years before. And he just got really angry. He said, well, what isn't Lord of the Rings? And she, no, it's all Lord of the Rings. And finally, he said, well, why don't we do Lord of the Rings then? And it's as simple as that. And I think he was always very clear that he didn't make it as a Tolkien zealot. And that was important, because I think you can go wrong. If he'd been the guy who worshipped Lord of the Rings and knew everything there was to know about Tolkien, of which there are many, I think he would have come a cropper. I think because he was able to stand slightly back and come at it like a filmmaker, that was his success. And they got Philippa Boyens in, and she was the Tolkien obsessive. So they had someone on side to be that person. But that journey then, as you say, with Weinstein and Miramax, because he had a deal with Miramax. And it was just a fascinating glimpse into the hurdles any filmmaker goes through. You think a simple project. And one of the great voices I spoke to was a guy called Ken Kamins, who is Jackson's manager. I met him in LA, and he's great because he's an LA voice and always gives you the LA stories. Jackson is very New Zealand, as you expect, and all those things, but Ken Kamins will give you the kind of variety edge on the story, the business side. And then you start to realize Ken Kamins, made it happen. He's an incredible part of the story. And, when it, Weinstein threatened to, destroy the whole project with the Jackson wouldn't cut it back to a single film. And it all related to the fact that Disney couldn't give him enough money to do 2 films. And he was too proud to admit that. And so he threw it back at Jackson and said, it's all your fault. Jackson, he's just a lovely guy who was kind of rather blasted by the fury. And it's a great story that, Kamins spoke to Jackson. Jackson said, it's over. I'm going back to New Zealand. We're going to make small films, whatever. I can't do this Hollywood thing. And Kamins said, just leave it with me. And he got on the phone to Harvey and said, you give me a month to sell this thing. And Harvey, you've got 2 weeks and we get all the money back. And it was just, Harvey knew it. It was a deal that couldn't be done. And this miracle is that it got done. And obviously it's a very famous story, the New Line meeting and all those things. And Bob Shea saying, let's make 3 films, not 2, and all that stuff. That's been heavily mythologized since. And one of the joys of writing the book was taking, stories that were very well known, and Rings has got its own mythology, and trying just to get to the truth of things. So who was at that meeting? What happened? When did the green light come? What was the motivation behind New Line? They needed a franchise. They were trying to do Foundation. That would all fallen apart. All their other films couldn't get sequels going for various reasons. So one of the reasons he said, can I have 3 films, is that New Line needed a franchise. It was a business.
Yeah, that's 3 years of products they've got lined up,
Just, there on a desk in front of him was a franchise that he needed. And suddenly he was thinking, like, this book sold 50 million copies. Maybe there's something in this that people knew. And you mentioned, Aragorn, which is the incredible story of getting Viggo Mortensen at the 11th hour after Stuart Townsend didn't fit, and Jackson basically fired him. And that was a story I knew I couldn't avoid. But what you try and do is go into it and just open it up. And it was an incredible story of phone calls. All these phone calls. He was shooting, and there were calls to Michael Desky at New Line and to New Line itself. And lists were made, and everybody honed in on Viggo Mortensen, and they found him like in Idaho or something. He's right in the middle of nowhere. They finally got him on the phone, and he's just, I don't know if you've interviewed Viggo Mortensen, but he is, he's a very smart man, but he's away with the fairies. He's coming from a different zone, a different place. He's a poet warrior. He was perfect for the role. They soon came to realize, but he doesn't talk straight. So you don't, and it's just this kind of, you start asking these bizarre questions about, you know, when was my character born, and when did he move in with the elves, and does he sing, and Jackson's just like, what? You know, I've got to go and shoot some stuff. And then they got into on the phone. There were 3 phone calls, not one. There were 3 different phone calls. And Jackson, you know, he was called away from set for the final one. Said, look, Vigo needs to talk to you one last time. And Vigo was like, yeah. Jackson thought he'd lost him. He thought he's gone. And I've got to go back to the drawing board. You know, who else is on the list? What are you going to do? And this kind of strange phone call. And he said, this is what Vigo's like. He doesn't talk. He just leaves gaps. He said, well, I'll see you Tuesday then. And with that, Vigo's on a plane, and, you know, and history is made. And you're right. Serendipity played its part so hugely in Rings, but there's that old saying that you make your own luck. And there was something driving that whole project that was creating its own luck as it went along.
Did you ever see any footage of the Aragorn that never was?
There isn't any actual footage. They never shot a day on set. What there is costume tests.
Right.
They did the costume test, and there were rehearsals with him. I mean, there were 2 months when the 4 Hobbit actors had arrived in Wellington, and Orlando Bloom, I think, had arrived. They all were doing the training and the vocal stuff. And Stuart Townsend was with them then, and he was part of the gang. They used to obviously all go out at night and hang out. They got into the kind of New Zealand social scene, and he was very much part of the team at that point. And it came to it as a real shock to them to find, you know, he'd been fired. They couldn't believe it. And it was a real wake-up call, I think. Just it had been such a joyous kind of occasion. Everyone, yeah, we're all in this together, and we're in New Zealand, we're young and having such fun. And suddenly 3 days into shooting, one of the principal characters has been fired. And they all had a bit like, oh, okay, this is big business, isn't it? We can't mess around anymore.
There's an element of sort of, it also shows that there's some steel beneath the sort of Jackson fluffiness. You know, there's a sort of, you know, he's like a hobbit and all that sort of stuff. But you know, don't underestimate him. If you're not, you know, up to snuff, and he's not happy with the situation, and he'll do anything to get to the end result that he wants.
Absolutely, he has got an iron core, and you have to. You know, you can't make 3 films back to back. You know, with a beloved book, you know, up on mountain tops, you know, without that drive. And he was very clear on, you know, in casting the film. You know, they're twofold. One, you had to kind of meet the requirements of these roles that everyone knows. You know, who was going to be Frodo, who was going to be Gandalf, these famous parts. That was a trial in itself. But he knew that anyone he cast had to be able to withstand a production that was going to run 18 months at the very least, without going crazy. They were going to be stuck up mountains in the wilds of New Zealand. You know, there was going to be no call for vanity. There was no get my agent on the phone. Where's my trailer? You had to be with them. It's like, you're with us or against us.
Right.
He got that right with everybody, but it seemed like Stuart Townsend, the frequency was wrong. He was too young, I think, for the part. And very quickly, he wasn't communicating with Jackson very well. And I think Jackson said, I can't do 18 months with Aragorn not talking to me. It's mad. He needs somebody. And once they got Vigo in, they had trouble getting Vigo back out of the wild, was the tricky bit. Snow would be falling and rain, whatever. Vigo goes, no, it's fine. Let's carry on shooting. They're like, no, this is bad weather, Vigo. You know, carrying his sword everywhere he went. They couldn't stop him being Aragorn.
and you just can't imagine it any other way. I mean, that first movie, I remember I just moved to Italy at the time, and I went back to Liverpool, and I think I saw it while I was back. In fact, I remember a very clear memory of having your Empire cover story of the preview, the one with Frodo on the cover, and leafing through it and thinking, this looks fucking awful. I just thought just the Elijah Wood and the ring, it just looked naff. I was just thinking, oh God, what are they going to do with this? And then it totally blew me away, that first film. I was just utterly flabbergasted by it. And I think that's one of the good things about the book as well is that journey of you as a sort of like a fan. You're sort of sitting, watching the films going, God, I hope these are good.
I'd invested so much into it, you know, not just in terms of you know, my own hopes and desires. You know, I put Empire right in front of that film and said, you know, we've got to be behind this. And Jackson was forever grateful for that. He said, because there was such a huge amount of negativity before the Cannes presentation. it was the laughing stock, as you say. Everyone was like rings and Frodo and what is this? It was the new Heaven's Gate. It was generally, what a New Line doing? It's going to kill the company. All of that was landing on Jackson, and we did an early cover at Empire. We got hold of some shots because we believed, this is the new Star Wars. We decided, and that was my fault. And I was kind of, because I'd read the books, and I kind of was revisiting my 14-year-old self through the medium of these films, and was not letting go. It's about iron will. I had my fingers into those films that no other journalist could get me off it. But there was that terror of like, what if he fucks it up? What is it? It's no good. But I'd seen the 25 minutes that were shown in Cannes, and I think that is always seen as the turning point in the whole endeavor in a way. I mean, Jackson was confident. Jackson knew what he was doing, but there was still a lot to achieve. They hadn't done any Gollum yet. They hadn't done all sorts of special effects things. But it was a Bob Shea decision, the head of New Line. He said, let's change the conversation on this film. And they took this 25 minutes to Cannes and did a big party and interviews. That's where we did our first story from. That's where I first met Jackson, in fact, Cannes. And it was just strange. There was just, you never know with anything. But as we were waiting outside the Olympia, I'm sure you know the Olympia in Cannes very well.
Yeah.
Many war stories I'm sure you have from the Olympia. But it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. It was quite an overcast day, and we're all kind of there, the journalists, early. And there's probably about 20 of us here for the preview. And we realized, looking amongst us, we were excited. We were kind of it was like kind of giddiness, like we were children. We sensed this was the important thing. And you don't know and all this thing. And it took us, they couldn't find the keys for the door. And we were like kind of zombies, just kind of scratching at the window. Like, finally let us in. And just sitting there, waiting for the footage, it genuinely felt a little bit awe-inspiring. It was kind of exciting. Jackson came out and introduced it and apologized for it, as he always does. This is early, please don't. And it began. And what it was it's like a little montage of the beginning bits of Fellowship. Then it's the cave troll sequence they showed in its entirety, although it wasn't completely finished. And then at the end, there was a montage of all three films. But the first thing you saw is Gandalf knocking on the door and Ian Holm coming out as Bilbo. And for sort of, 10 seconds, your brain goes, this is wrong. The scale's wrong. Everything looks weird. But actually, it's not wrong. It's just it worked. Your brain hadn't kind of caught up with it. And what I started to sense and felt this kind of great relief was the special effects started not to matter because the characters started to take over. And you started to think, God, that's a brilliant portrayal of Bilbo. He's got it. And then McKellen was just so effortless. You started to go, not worry about scale and all those things. And it just eased in. And by the time we were watching the Moria stuff, they were virtually cheering, in the preview. And that night in Cannes, that's the only thing anyone talked about. It was no official entry. It was nothing to do with the festival, really. Any bar you were in, did you go to the footage? Did you get to see the footage? Is it as good as they're saying?
Right.
And Mark Aldesky always says, he's a wonderful fellow. He was executive on it for New Line. He's quite an emotional fellow. He just said, I cried. Relief.
Was that the first time he'd seen it as well?
No, he'd seen bits and pieces because obviously he'd been in and out of New Zealand, and it's going to get interesting stories. It was actually Bob Shea who shaped it all, the actual package.
Right.
And Jackson says, fair play to him. I just wanted to do this bit, and he just wanted to do the scene. And Bob Shea, let's give them the whole scope of the project. And then he was right. Bob Shea knew how to market, to speak to people. And he said from that point on, it was all about containing the excitement. Then it was about, okay, we're onto something. But it was the point where, more money went to New Zealand to help them kind of do things. Special effects were enlarged, where to digital became a much more of a going concern. That was kind of the breaking of the dam, and it shifted from the grand folly into the new Star Wars.
I was thinking about this really recently, about how I have a tendency to sort of really, really like things and then kind of go off them for a while. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was so into Lord of the Rings. I watched them all at the cinema, obviously. I bought the DVDs the minute they were out. I bought the extended versions the minute they were out. I listened to the commentaries. I watched the hours and hours of material. And then at a certain point, I sort of started to slightly disparage them and sort of go, well, the first one's brilliant, but the others, aren't that good. And I'm not, there's this and there's that, and it never ends and it goes on for ages. And I really feel that they deserve a rewatch now, because I feel like I've got over my sort of pretending I don't like Pink Floyd, and I need to go back and listen to it and go, oh no, actually I really do like this. This is, it's not cool to like it, but I love it,
I mean, honestly, try writing a book on them. You have to kind of unstitch the whole making of them. And the amount of times I rewatch them to the point where you start to see, as you say, you start to see the cracks. And when you've kind of gone down to the minutiae, you can almost see Jackson's hand coming around the side and prodding people. You can, and after I finished the book, I said I'm going to leave it for about 2 or 3 years. I've got to make a break from Middle Earth and that world and go and do other things, because it was spoiling for me. It's spoiling the films. But I got the 4K versions, and I watched the first half of Fellowship in 4K. This is because I got a new telly, and I want you to see what it looked like on my new telly. And it was great to sort of get back into it again. And you reminded what a great character piece it is. All the special effects, and especially some of them are dated a little bit and other things, but it's a great character piece. And it's the best thing Orlando Bloom's ever done. He's very funny in it, Orlando Bloom, the kind of looks he gives. I mean, Mortensen's just impeccable. But you get the scenes of Christopher Lee and Ian McKellen battling, and you're going, this stuff is good stuff. It's richness in it. And
I remember thinking how much, especially of that first one, how much of a mix of genres it was. There was a feeling of real sort of like, even the very beginning felt like a Hammer horror, that sort of like, there is a darkness in the mountains and all this sort of stuff. And then you'd have like a Western where, Frodo's being rescued by Liv Tyler, and a really great horse race. It's really, it's sort of thundering horse race. And then, the Saruman Gandalf fight was like a kung fu. It was like something from Suhak and Once Upon a Time in China or something. Or maybe better, Chinese Ghost Story. It just felt like such a mix of stuff.
I think that's Jackson a little bit, and Jackson's important lack of reverence for Tolkien. He loved the book and was, I mean, you'd have to be incredibly into it to make the films. But as I say, he was distant from it and knew that he could shake it up a bit, and knew that it needed to be cinematic and fun. It needed to be fun. And he's a great sense of fun, Jackson. So if you've got two wizards battling, you want to show it off a bit and have fun with it. And then it's kind of like they've got these wonderfully, the bigatures, the famous huge models they use for all the kind of grand architecture of Middle Earth. And they realized very quickly that there were such good models that they held up to the camera coming very close. And once that was established, Jackson just said, right. And he had his camera just springing across Middle Earth, up and down these buildings, the vertiginous power of the film is enormous. Let's not just go peer off the side of a building. Let's plunge all the way down. And you can see a guy just sort of letting loose. He's created this playground for himself. And just said, well, I'm going to make a Peter Jackson film in Middle Earth. And you may not realize it, because you'll all be obsessed with, is Frodo right, and the ring, and is it telling the story properly? And of course, they had Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens and policing all that side of it. But they had Jackson going, what we need is energy. Otherwise, it can become stodgy very quickly. He always said, two things. One, he needed, the brightness of it and the acceleration of it, battle scenes and fighting and things he loved in films, the Ray Harryhausen stuff, if you want. But he said he also needed credibility. He said you are 10 degrees off being French and Saunders mocking. You're right. 10 degrees away from, because the language can sound so absurd. But if you've got Christopher Lee and Ian McKellen walking into a scene and delivering it like it's Shakespeare, that's you land. You get these anchors that can just reassure you and then hold the film down, that allow you then to go off and do potty things and stuff. And in 2 and 3, I think the great anchor is Andy Serkis, Gollum, which was the biggest risk of the whole trilogy. If that had gone wrong, it just falls apart. And because they got that right, and that then, suddenly we had psychological inquiry in the film. You were looking beneath the surface of characters. The idea of the ring and the junkie and all the things they put into it. And that was another thing that just anchored it all and stopped it being silly. And it was silly in so many respects. And all the things you mentioned are true. But it had these things in it that resisted the pull of silliness. Tolkien always called it sillification. He hated the idea of adaptation because he knew whatever there'd be sillification that would come into play. And he loathed Walt Disney and all that because he fairy tales and lovely castles and unicorns, hated all that side of it. And I think Jackson understands that. And I think Ridley Scott would have been quite envious on some levels that Jackson did a bit of the grit and the mud and of his world. You know, the orcs look like they've been in battle. You know, they look beaten up.
There's that brilliant scene where they pull, I think it's whatever they're called, the Saruman orcs, a Hurukai.
Yeah.
They're pulled out of the mud, you know, and there's just this sort of sliminess to them that is excellent, you know. Even when I was like in the height of my sort of love for them, I did feel there was a kind of, as they became more gargantuan, there was a kind of law of diminishing returns a little bit into, I remember one part that
Need a holiday gift that will keep her sparkling all year long? Blue Nile, the original online jeweler, has experts on hand 24/7 who can help you find the perfect piece. Beyond that, Blue Nile makes the gifting experience easier than ever with guaranteed free shipping and returns, as well as a wide assortment of jewelry of the highest quality at the best price. Right now, get 30% off jewelry at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com for 30% off. BlueNile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
I don't know. Again, I'm not sure if I'm being snobby in retrospect, but it was like when you sort of got some of the jokes, it started to become a bit James Bondy, where it was like, okay, he does this in every film, sort of like the cat, how many orcs we get to kill, and that sort of stuff. That it started being like, okay, that's the Orlando Bloom slide that he has to do, in every film. And
I suppose, it's the difficulty of success is one thing, and they're really interesting projects in the sense that they were all certainly shot at the same time, but there was a great deal of filmmaking going on Two Towers and Return of the King after The Fellowship of the Ring came out, so they could see how people were responding to it and sort of react accordingly in the moment, rather than waiting 5 years and doing a sequel. So it's quite unique in the respect of, here's our box office, here's the reviews, here's the fan response, and here's him sitting in the edit, and they're still doing special effects, something on Two Towers. And they were doing some supplementary shooting still on the two subsequent films, and they could kind of cut their cloth accordingly without changing what they're about. I mean, they couldn't change the story, and people loved Bloom and loved Legolas. So Jackson just went, well, let's play to that constituency. Let's play to that. I mean, the problem in the Hobbit films, they just go too far with it.
Right.
It's sort of, let's do a bit of the musical number. Let's do the Gene Kelly routine in the middle of Lord of the Rings. And again, you come back to his sense of fun and his blasphemy. I think he wants to throw into things and go, well, we've got this huge battle scene, full of these orcs, all done at night in a pouring rain, kind of Kurosawa style. And they've got all the special effects working in this incredible software called Massive that created thousands of troops. And it's like, well, you need something in the middle of it so we can just remember what's going on and orientate. So they just threw that, sliding down the stairs on the shield, which is absurd. It's comic book.
Yeah.
But I think from Jackson's point of view, the 12-year-old kid will go, I love Legolas, and I want more of that Legolas stuff. Whereas the 40-something Tolkien, devotee is like, oh, that's ridiculous. That would never happen in the book. And that, but at the same time, the Tolkien devotee is going, well, that Gandalf is absolutely spot on, and that Aragorn is exactly as I imagined him. And Edoras, the kind of the almost Viking-like town on the hill, looks absolutely like Edoras did on the pages of the book in your imagination. So all of that was concrete. So I think we gave some latitude to Jackson to have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, how did it work? I mean, you've already sort of referred to this, I think, but your book came out after like several of the cast members had started their own books or had even published them. I think Sean Astin's was out before yours, maybe.
Yes, his came first. It was like all things in all the other authors you've spoken to. Getting a book underway is a slow process.
Sure.
And the origins of the book came about that I was interviewing Jackson. I'd done all this kind of Lord of the Rings coverage. I've been out to New Zealand a few times, and I got to know him. And he's a very nice guy. I'm very into film magazines, into a new empire. Right. He's a geeky guy and loved to chat. And I was chatting to him. We're doing some kind of endless retrospectives we were doing on Empire. And I was chatting to him about the Sean Connery story. And is it true that New Line wanted Sean Connery, and did they pitch? And he said, "Right, I'll tell you that story." And it's a famous story that actually they did. They sent these scripts to the Bahamas or wherever he was, to his wonderful place. And Jackson, they said you could follow the courier. They had the reports, and they knew it had been delivered to Mr. Connery. The scripts and the proposal and the deal that New Line had on the table for Connery was phenomenal. The money he would have made out of Rings if he'd only known. And they never heard anything. It was silence. And Smaug slumbered on, in his kind of mansion in the Bahamas. So he told me the whole story, and I got the truth. And I sat there thinking, I can do this as a book. This is one of those anecdotes that haven't been told, on the endless DVDs. There are other parts of this whole thing, and I can put them down in a book. And I was already sitting on this kind of gold mine of material. There's only so much you can get into Empire at any one time. There was oodles more. Christopher Lee and anyone who's ever interviewed Richard Taylor, who's the head of a Weta Workshop. Every transcription is about 20,000 words long. I mean, he just talks and talks. And I was sitting on 80,000 words of Richard Taylor. So I just thought, and then I went to Jackson's people and I said, look, if he doesn't want me to do this, then I will back off. I owe him a lot for that. And they came back and said, no, Peter's interested, but you've got to go through HarperCollins because of the Tolkien estate and the way the whole thing is set up. So any material he is not officially approved, but given me, needs to be published by HarperCollins. They were the kind of the points of the deal. It goes all the way back to New Line. So I kind of went, oh God, HarperCollins, huge publisher. This is going to be a nightmare. But I went through the processes. There was a Warner publishing arm that put me into HarperCollins. And I just got this guy called Chris Smith at HarperCollins, who sort of out of the blue gave me a call and said, that your proposals arrived from Warner. Do you want to come in and have a chat? And serendipity, is you mentioned it. They were exactly at the point where all the Hobbit films had finished. So they weren't publishing any more making of Hobbit books. They'd all sort of gone. So the next couple of years were kind of Tolkien filmmaking free. They didn't have anything planned. And like all publishers have, schedules to meet and things that sort of fill their book publishing lists. So exactly the moment I pitched, they needed a Tolkien filmmaking book. Right. And he kind of spoke to them. And then you do the things where you put chapters together, and the initial pitch was much more half Lord of the Rings, half Hobbit. And in the writing, it became clear I needed to write about Lord of the Rings, and the Hobbit was just an after effect, a legacy thing, which people have complained about. They all wanted a bitchy book on the Hobbit, but I wasn't writing that book. And that's when it started to sort of gather steam. And then my dealings became back to Jackson. Jackson said, right, well, come out and you need to talk to Michael Diskey and Ken Kamins, and the kind of feelers went out and the whole thing sort of started underway. But I always said the whole way along, sort of the top of my original pitch was, this is not a book about magic rings and swords and elves and dwarves. They are all incidental. It's a book about a gang of Kiwi filmmakers who climbed Everest. Right. And everyone said it couldn't be done. That was the theme of the book. It was about, how did this happen? And Lord of the Rings have been floating around Hollywood. And I did all the chapters on Borman's attempts, Bakshi's attempts, and the Beatles' attempts, and all those kind of things. And what was the truth of them? That was another thing. It was always get to the truth of the myth. But it was like, tell the story of these New Zealanders. And obviously within that, then it becomes a kind of biography of Jackson. But that, again, is slightly incidental. It's just a story of how they did it, how they achieved it. And it grew, it became quite long in that telling. You learn the frowns of your publisher's face when you're like, oh, Ian, we're not even halfway through the story, and you haven't done Gollum yet, and you haven't done the battles yet. And there were these kind of personal things I wanted to throw in, my own journeys to New Zealand and how amazing it was to be there, not just because it was Lord of the Rings, but because also they were so different from America. You go on set and they welcomed you. They loved you being there. If you go on set in LA and it's just like, stand here and don't move until we tell you to move. Don't look anybody else in the eye. Just behave yourself. School trip. You end up in, you're on Lord of the Rings, and they're just like, right, what are we going to do? Let's show you the workshop. Here are the swords. Do you want to put a helmet on? You become a kid, and you walk on, and the person goes, Jackson just wanders over to say hello. I mean, directors don't do that. And you go and just chats you through what they're going to film. They're doing, the first scene I saw them film was Brad Dourif and Christopher Lee. And it's Dourif arriving to tell him bad news. I think it's only in the extended cut. And Brad Dourif's a weird guy. I don't even have spoken to him. He's quite self-conscious guy in the full kind of worm tongue get-up. And he's like, you come to see me fail, haven't you? And I'm like, no, I'm just going to watch the scene. And he was great in the scene. And I remember it's like, Jackson had the new lines written in biro on a crunched up piece of paper in his hand. These lines for Wormtongue, this $300 million production, and the lines are written in biro on a.
That's his number 8 wire right there.
Number 8 wire right there, and you think, well, that's it. But of course, underneath that, this incredible industry is going on, and incredible ingenuity and skill. Everywhere you look, Middle Earth was being pulled down or put up. And the sheer volume of it was incredible.
Yeah. And what about the Hobbit films afterwards? Because I mean, I think that actually might have been also something a little bit like the Matrix movies the sequels made you like the original Matrix a little bit less, because it took away the uniqueness and the freshness of that sort of retrospectively. I sort of had the same feeling about the Hobbit films, where it was like, the first one, whoa, are we going to be in the kitchen for much longer? Are we going to be?
I know. Yeah, it was. It's a funny thing, because I'd done Lord of the Rings, and it had been this kind of great experience for me, both in terms of the satisfaction that had the films done well, and the things I got to write, and the traveling I got to do, and just as a career thing, it was a great experience. And then you have that kind of ego thing where the Hobbit films come up, and I've done this kind of magnanimous thing in the Empire office, going, I can't do the Hobbit. I've done Lord of the Rings. Give it to somebody else, because I've had my moment in Middle Earth, and I get But then I get this kind of email through from Warner Brothers saying, Peter's asked for you. He wants you to come out early in production. You're a good luck charm. He wants you around to start covering it.
Right.
And you can't resist. I'm showing it to Mark, who's the then editor, going, I know I've said I'm stepping out, but Peter's asked for me. There's a plane waiting with my name on it. They painted my face on the side of the plane. And so I became the Hobbit guy. And it were good experiences, again, for me, in terms of being a journalist. But the industry of it was different. The studios have been built up and become much more efficient and Hollywood-like. And the whole thing ran to a slightly different rhythm. It'd be wrong of me to say I knew the films weren't going to be quite as good as soon as on set. That wasn't apparent. There was lots of wonderful things to see, but it just didn't have quite the same atmosphere. One of the fabulous things of Rings was catering, and they ate in this kind of hut, which was a kind of corrugated roof, upon which the rain would rattle, and everybody ate. No one was in their trailer. And you looked across, and there was Bernard Hill and Ian McKellen with their beards in nets, so they didn't dip in their food, chatting away in costume. Every orc, was coming to drink out of cartons because they didn't have time to take their makeup off. So they were sitting catering, sitting around drinking in these kind of juice cartons. And it was just this like tableau of it's like something out of Monty Python. It was just wonderful. On a Friday afternoon, they had a quartet playing classical music to the cast of Lord of the Rings. It was just like, this is the most crazy but wonderful thing. And that wasn't there with The Hobbit. The kind of, they thought the homemade, the homemade movie on this huge scale, but it didn't feel homemade on The Hobbit. And I didn't get the sense of things going wrong, but I think Peter Jackson looked a little bit like he didn't quite know why he was doing it.
Right.
And I think he felt, when you talk to him, he would be slightly, and he can be a bit of a negative Nelly. It's a Kiwi sensibility thing. You're humble to the point where you sound like you're just slagging yourself off, and you have to kind of lift them up a bit. And on The Hobbit, he just was like, yeah. And then I was ill, and then Guillermo dropped out, and it was a tough, and I really just couldn't get going. And this was kind of, you're filming it, you've got to talk a better shot than this.
Do you think it was the idea that, because the myth of sort of Lord of the Rings is the point where they realize it's all going to work is when they divide it into 3 films, and with The Hobbit I got the feeling it was like the opposite. The point where it sort of seemed to fall apart was when they decided we're going to do 3 films. I mean, maybe even 2 felt like a push to me, because it's a relatively it's like a linear narrative,
Yeah, I think that there were kind of, I think Jackson had his doubts even before he even started on it. There's a whole sort of post Lord of the Rings period when the Hobbit rights were even more entangled than the Lord of the Rings rights were, and it looked unlikely it was even going to happen. And he'd fallen out with New Line, and all these things had gone on. And I think he'd made his peace with moving on. I think he was quite happy to doing whatever future projects he'd set up. And it came back to that thing of he needed to keep people in New Zealand employed. There were now thousands of people who worked at workshop and digital and studio people. And they'd all moved families over to Wellington on the hope, that the Hobbit was about to kick in. And I just thought he did have a responsibility and maybe love. And of course, once you're going, he was applying his filmmaking craft to that. But there was this tension, I think, with him and the material. He looked at the material and thought, this has got a different tone of voice to Lord of the Rings. And it had. It's a bedtime story, The Hobbit.
Yes.
The language of it by Tolkien is to his children. And so it's a beloved book because of that. Has this, the narrator's voice is slightly separate from the story, and it's kind of a ditty in some ways. And it was intended, it's a children's story. And I think Jackson said, I couldn't, I remember early on saying, I found that very hard to come to terms with. What is the tone of this material? And of course, Warner are leaning on him to go, we need Lord of the Rings too. We need more epic. We need more battles. We need all that stuff. That's what we're paying for. And there was an awful lot more money going into The Hobbit than Rings. There was something like 60 million had been spent before Jackson signed on to direct. So all through that Guillermo period and all through that, there was $60 million of pre-production had gone into The Hobbit. The drawings and the armor and all that stuff. And it's like there was too much. The limits of Rings were to its benefit. The number 8 thinking had to come out. Once you have too much money and freedom, well, although it wasn't quite freedom, but too much power in the sense of being Hollywood, the number 8 thinking becomes more distant, I think. So that was a factor. And I think, and again, there are various debates about things. Warner, because who had subsumed New Line in the meantime, kind of lent on them a bit and lent on them to put the romance in, lent on them to make it more epic. I think Jackson wanted to do more of a punk rocky kind of the dwarves mucking up the great Lord of the Rings edifice, and just not caring a hoot. He wanted that kind of knockabout bad taste comedy more to the front. And that got kind of pushed to the back. But the trilogy thing was a mistake. I don't think there was enough material, as you say, to stretch it out. But I think it was done honestly. And there were a lot of comments made about, it's for the money and all these things. Warner forced him to do it. Jackson told me, he said, we just sat down one afternoon about what the second film was going to be to map out the drama of the second film.
Right.
And they kept talking about things they had to pull out and things they hadn't done. And Jackson, one of them, just said, if we did 3, we could do that. We could do that. And said, well, let's go to Warner and said, we'll try 3. And Warner, of course, went, yes, please, thank you very much. It's another Christmas sorted for everybody. The bonuses are in the post. And those films, each one nearly made I think the first one made $1 billion, second and third one made something like $900 million each. And that's Marvel money, So from a Warner point of view,
from a commercial point of view, an absolute triumph,
Yeah. But you're right. They've got stretched like taffy, and there are things thrown in almost for the sake of throwing them in that you lose the heart of it a bit, I think. With Rings, there was never a lack of story. Whatever your take on Tolkien is, he gives you story. This story and then story and then story. And one of the marvels of Lord of the Rings, and it's a much better book than The Hobbit. It's the other thing people don't remember, tend to forget. It's a much, much better book. The characters are better. The visuals are better. And he just throws in these set pieces, Tolkien. He was great in Hollywood, Tolkien. He writes a set piece. Moria, everyone remembers. Shelob's lair. he just throws that in late in the story. Giant spider in this layer, and you think, gosh, yeah, he's good at this stuff. And I think that's part of it. The Hobbit just didn't have as much good stuff in it.
Yeah, it's like, as you say, it's a children's story. It's very episodic. It's very, it's called There and Back Again. It's that's the structure and everything.
Yeah.
But I mean, the problem with that idea of, oh, well, we can't tell this and we can't tell this, but if we have a third film, we'll be able to do. But that's not a film. A film is not like a bunch of cool scenes. It should be. And I mean, I think it was, that was the thing that got me, that I ended up sort of like huffing and puffing about when I was watching it, was there was something that diluted about the epic, that all that. I remember hearing Jackson in an interview, probably on one of the extended editions, where he's actually talking about, everybody talks about it's a battle between good and evil, but that's not actually very interesting. I'm interested in the hobbits. And I think that's where the Hobbit, ironically, kind of lost the plot, because it became this huge thing about good and evil, and it lost sight of the fact that that's not that interesting. It's the hobbits that are more interesting.
Yeah. And of course, the resonance with the hobbits is Tolkien in World War One, and the song,
right,
that essentially that they're little Englishmen going off to World War One. That's kind of the underlying idea in it, and they're forever changed when they return, and to such an extent that they can't even stay settled. It's true, and I thought there were opportunities in the Hobbit. Maybe they could have. I think the dragon's a great character, and he does him well, and that sequence works for me. But I thought that needs to be the crescendo almost. The Battle of Five Armies is actually a bit of an afterthought. In fact, in the book, it doesn't really happen at all. Bilbo gets knocked out, and he wakes up, and the battle's virtually done. And of course, they couldn't quite do that. But I just thought, as soon as you've done the dragon, everything after that's a bit of a, it's the party's over, and we're just kind of dribbling on to the end.
Yeah, the Battle of the Five Armies is like someone turning up and saying, "Okay, who wants coffee?"
The Hoover out, and go, come on, everybody, go home now. It did. It gets trapped in that, and I think Jackson would acknowledge that. There are good passages in it, and good bits of filmmaking, and Armitage is good. McKellen never lets you down. On some levels, it's okay. It's just a mediocre fantasy trilogy.
Right.
Problem is the comparison with Rings is its great sort of yoke it has to carry. This kind of Oscar-winning trilogy that was kind of vaunted by even the most cynical critics, to a middle-order studio fantasy film set for Christmas.
Yeah,
and that felt like a come down. But I think in his heart, maybe Jackson didn't want to do it. And I'd be very interested to have seen Del Toro's version. I've seen some of the artwork, and it's very clockworky. It's very Hellboy. He was going to, stick to the same universe, but I think he was going to bring his own complexion to it. He was going to do he was going to build a lot of the special effects, as he likes to do. A lot of the creatures were going to be done in situ. And Jackson got very used to Weta Digital kind of doing that for him.
Right.
People talked about the fact they weren't doing bigatures anymore in The Hobbit. They did digital, buildings.
Yeah.
Which may give you more flexibility on some level, but you lose that kind of tangibility of things being there.
Yeah, I remember him talking up the frame rate as well as this big sort of thing, and it was just like, I think he was like a voice of one. And the more I listened to him talk about it, the more I was thinking, are you trying to convince yourself, or are you trying to convince me? I'm not.
Yeah, that was another experiment that, and I admire. He's a very technical guy on some levels, Jackson. Yeah, he began, as we talked about, making special effects for Wurzel Gummidge. And Wurzel Gummidge in Australia, where they're filming in New Zealand. Wurzel Gummidge Down Under, I think it was called. And he built an exploding doll. That's for your 70s children's reference there.
We've got to have one every single.
Got to have one. And he was building things in his basement models, and that's where he came up through. So he is technically minded, and I think through the success of Rings and West Digital becoming, as good as ILM, basically as important as ILM, I think there was a certain sense that he had to see what the future was. Cameron thinks like this as well. That
right, yeah.
And George Lucas, I've got to map out a future for movies, because this isn't going to go on forever. People are going to get bored, and you can see, things coming around the corner. You couldn't see the COVID thing coming around the corner, but he obviously understood that cinema needed to reinvent himself. So again, I think he goes into things very honestly and thought, well, this frame rate is interesting. We can get rid of motion blur and we can all that. Problem is that you lose texture. The grain is important to people, and especially it's really important to Middle Earth because it gives it a sense of myth and time and those things. Once you're peering through whatever it was, 48 frames per second, and you're looking onto the set basically. You can see the seam down the back of Gandalf's hat. You're like, there's too much detail here. But I think again, he's not a cynical guy, Jackson, and I don't think all decisions were correct, but I think he thought, well, this is a chance to elevate, using the technology to elevate the world, and it didn't work. I mean, I think I saw 2 of them that way.
Yeah. What about his sort of post Hobbit work? Really, I mean, he's sort of gone into documentaries, and we're looking forward to. I'm very much looking forward to the Beatles documentary about to come out. And he did the First World War documentary as well. Tintin disappeared, I think, and I haven't heard of that since.
Tintin was obviously Spielberg directed and Jackson produced, and Weta did all the special effects. It didn't do quite as well as they'd hoped. I think it did all right, but I think it did, and I don't think Spielberg particularly enjoyed the whole motion capture process. Spielberg's a guy who's quite traditional in his filmmaking methods. And he wanted to go away and shoot people on sets and do the traditional thing. He's not as much as a technocrat as Jackson is. And I spoke a couple of times. I spoke to Jackson. Are you going to do the Tintin sequel? And he goes, "Yeah, it's on the list. It's wherever this list existed, it was on it." But then he goes, "But it's up to the studios. It's not my call. I'll do it. I want to do it." And he wants to do Prisoners of the Sun. He wants to do that story. And I think the studio, it was sort of Sony and DreamWorks together, whatever co-production, didn't think it was worthwhile. Or the time frame didn't work out. It was going to be Jackson directing the second one with Spielberg producing. And I don't know whether they both got distracted with other things or simply the deal didn't work out, or everybody quietly thought, well, one Tintin movie kind of did it and people weren't swept away and we'll move on to other stuff.
Nobody's clamoring for the
no, there wasn't really that feeling. I should watch it again, that film. I haven't seen it for a long time, and I remember quite liking it. Is it Tintin or not? This is the thing, isn't it? Everyone, I mean, there's Tolkien and then there's Tintin. You can't tamper with these worlds, and he got Tolkien right, but Tintin was difficult.
Yeah, I don't. It was that CGI thing of it never really. I didn't ever really feel that it sort of invented its world and it got its look absolutely right. I thought, there were great moments, and I loved the chase towards the end. I thought that was superb. That was just. But you're almost guaranteed to get something like that in any Spielberg film. There's always going to be that good moment, or for that matter, any Peter Jackson film. I love the barrels chase in the Hobbit, for instance, as much as the rest of the film doesn't necessarily hold up.
It does got stuff. I suppose there's a kind of an atmosphere in the Hergé books, however you call them, graphic novels, or what you want to describe them as. That's impossible to put onto the screen. It's about the drawings he did and the way he portrayed his world that I think may be unadaptable in that sort of pure sense of what Hergé gave us. So any version of Tintin is going to be slightly perverted, slightly spoiled. And I thought he got a lot of things right. But the problem with Tintin is that, and it's what makes the comic so great, is that Tintin himself is a blank. He's a cipher. In fact, you're not even sure what job he has. Is he an adventurer? Is he a reporter? Is he an investigator? What is he? But he's there to the audience project onto. But that doesn't quite work on film. You've got to create a character out of him. And all the people around him are eccentric and very rich characters. But Tintin is a blank. And I don't think they found a Tintin. It was Jamie Bell, wasn't it, who sort of did the motion capture and the voice. But he didn't feel like Tintin to me, and I suppose that's another possible job.
What do you think? Do you know what Jackson's working on now? I mean, because of he's releasing the documentary on Disney, I think, and Yeah. What do you have any idea of what he might have lined up?
Last time I was out there was 2018, and and obviously we've had huge world-changing events in between. And he was really getting into the Beatles thing back then. That was the thing on his mind. We were talking about. That's we're doing a sort of anniversary interview, and so we did a bit of the old stuff, rings and things. But he wanted to talk about the Beatles because that's where his head was. And he's a passionate Beatles fan, absolutely obsessive Beatles fan. And he was just wanted to, you've got to watch this stuff. This is going to completely revise your opinion of what was going on with the band at the time. And John is funny and he's having a great time. He's not a pain at all. And it's just these young guys making music together in a way you've never seen. And he watched all 54 hours of footage. He went through it all. And I thought, this guy's absolutely delighted to be in the element he's in. It's that thing with directors. At a certain point, they just want control. Everything has been so hard. Directing is really hard, and when you're doing films of the scale that Jackson was doing, it must be absolutely exhausting. And I think he just got to the point where he could do these documentaries where he has absolute control. The footage already exists. It's pre-existing, and now he just go into an edit suite and get Weta to do the colorization and bring it all to life, and they'll work on the soundtracks. And you can call Paul McCartney and get his stories and do all that and bring it to life. I thought, he's in his element. And I said, is there a feature film cooking away in the back burner? And he said, well, there are things, and I don't know, I may move. And I spoke to Philippa Boyens at the same time. She's always very honest, Philippa Boyens. She lives literally next door to Jackson. They live next door to each other, right by the waterside. It's very beautiful. And she said, he will. She said, he's in this documentary place at the moment, but there are projects, and they might be small. He might do a New Zealand film, something like Heavenly Creatures.
That would be really interesting. That'd be really interesting. That's sort of like, it's George Lucas sort of made it into something of a cliche because he was constantly talking about wanting to do these small experimental films, and it's just like
to his early days.
Yeah, George, you've had you could finance them yourself. You don't even need a studio or anything. You could just put a few million together and shoot them. So after a while, you just sort of think, okay, you're just talking nonsense. Then you just don't want to do anything, But with Jackson, I feel that he's because of his background, I really do feel he could get back and do a 90-minute Blumhouse horror type movie.
I keep encouraging. I kept saying, if you can't think of anything else, just do Bad Taste 2. Just go back. There are scripts of Bad Taste 2 somewhere, and just do it. Whatever level you want to do it. And he laughs. He goes, "Yeah, we'll do Bad Taste 2." I thought that's the kind of thing I think people might enjoy. Make it for 30 million, because obviously it's going to cost a lot more than the original, because it always does, but not at a level where there's huge amounts of pressure. And I think you can just have a ball with it. Out in space, you can star in it, and it'd just be absolutely mad and ridiculously gory and over the top. That's a way of almost exercising all the past, Oscars and Hobbit and all the things that have gone on. Just to go, this is who I am.
Go back to the beginning. Yeah. The Meet the Freebles and what was the other one that he did? The one with the lawnmower.
Brain Dead.
Brain Dead. God, I love that film. That's so good. The Kung Fu Priest and the.
It's just the scene with he goes in at the end of the lawnmower, and the stories of the making of that. They had to use food coloring. They had vats of blood. Yeah. Actually, every item of clothing, him and Richard Taylor, every item of clothing they owned was covered in red food coloring, and they smelt of the film. They couldn't wash it off for weeks. And Richard Taylor goes, I look back and think, these are the best days of my life. just making that kind of, hands-on doesn't even get the way. It's just absolutely
into your elbows, up to your elbows in it. And I look forward to sort of a return to that sort of thing. Because he's a great filmmaker. I watched Bad Taste when I was a kid. When I was in my teens, I guess. Yeah. On a dodgy VHS, and Heavenly Creatures impressed me. I remember it coming out and being really into it, and it was and going through the Lord of the Rings was a wonderful journey to have, and kind of I felt it was an impossible one. When I was a kid, I was either reading Lord of the Rings or Dune. for like
Right.
7 years. I was just alternate from one to the other, maybe try to read the Silmarillion at some point. So,
it's very hard to do. Yes.
Oh God, it's so difficult, that book.
Which is a load of papers he wrote and he sort of threw together and they were edited. It's not really a story rather than sort of a history book.
Yeah.
And I think they're glad they didn't really get into that. But
what do you think of the idea of the Amazon series, which is there's slightly disturbing rumors coming out of that? I feel
it's hard to assess, really. First, I was, it's like the football team you support. I'm Jackson's boy, home and away. So I can't, that's now always this new opposition that's come over the horizon. It ain't my Lord of the Rings. It ain't my Middle Earth, because here's my guy, but he's away, talking to Ringo Starr, so he doesn't care. So I have a kind of, my Empire days have always taught me that, try and think positively first, and there's a lot of money going in, and I think a lot of hope and care. It feels very big to me, and I'm not sure exactly what story they're telling. Because they're not doing the Silmarillion, and they're not obviously doing the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. They're doing sort of a bit of the appendices, and extrapolating outwards, and it seems like there's a lot of work to be done in doing ersatz Tolkien, or doing an extended version of Tolkien that isn't actually him. So that concerns me. I don't quite understand who the characters are, and as soon as you say Middle Earth, the kind of the things that I feel you've got to have funny hobbits and wizards. What are the things everyone, if you've not read a word of Tolkien on the page, but you love those movies, and Amazon has sunk millions and millions into these series, they want the biggest audience possible. So surely they've got to sell them on the thing they get. They go, okay, where's those quirky hobbit guys, and where's the old wizards, and where's the Gollum guy? And they'll just want more of the same, or versions of the same. But by the sounds of it, it's much more sort of austere and ornate in the elven histories, and it's a bit more Game of Thrones.
I was going to say that's the other thing that Lord of the Rings didn't have to deal with. Game of Thrones really sort of medievalized and historicized the fantasy genre in a way that I wonder how you would make if Peter Jackson never made Lord of the Rings and he was starting now. You have to contend with Game of Thrones. You can't ignore it.
Well, first of all, they would do a TV series of Rings.
Right.
They would look at the length and probably break it down into 3 seasons or 6 seasons and do sort of the way. I don't know whether Jackson would do that, because he's a cinematic guy, but I would imagine that's how you would go about it if you were to do Lord of the Rings now. But I think in a post Game of Thrones universe, it would be hard to be so playful in the way that Jackson is. There is quite a big difference between Rings and Game of Thrones. Although Game of Thrones obviously was very inspired by what Jackson had achieved, and the very presence of Sean Bean tells you that.
yeah.
But the way it sort of mounted battle scenes and sort of dealt with its fantasy elements in Game of Thrones owes a great debt, I think, to Lord of the Rings, and the way Jackson got hold of all that. But Lord of the Rings is more playful, and the characters are more innocent. There's no sex in it, and the violence is sort of meted out on the evil guys more than the good guys. And there are deaths, but there's no great shock twists in that sense. So I don't know what would Lord of the Rings look like now, post Game of Thrones. There probably would be a temptation to ramp it up a bit. And that was what's interesting is that I read all the early drafts for Lord of the Rings, the 2-film draft and various versions of the 3-film draft. They still got everything. I mean, Jackson keeps everything. And what was interesting is the kind of trajectory of their storytelling went from, we need to do something with Tolkien to make him more cinematic. We need to make him grow up a bit. Let's put Arwen, the Liv Tyler character, more front and center. Let's send her into battle. And they've shot stuff with her in battle.
Right, yeah. Liv Tyler in Helm's Deep.
She was in Helm's Deep, right. And there was a whole journey she makes across Rohan to get there that involved the children. It was sort of, the children, those 2 kids who make their way in after the raids on the villages. That was all an Arwen storyline that then got cut, because as they went along, they kept gravitating back to the book. it's kind of, however they argued, they went, well, in the end, Tolkien sort of solves the problem for us. They're there. It's, moving people around the damn map was very difficult. They're there. Where do you put them? And they sort of said, well, actually, see what it says in the book. The book was, oh, okay, if we just keep Arwen there, it solves 80 problems we've made for ourselves. But they had all these kind of scenes of Arwen saving Frodo on battlements and, much more frothy battle stuff. That would have been maybe a bit more Game of Thrones like. It wouldn't have been as I say, as grown up and sexy as Game of Thrones. But there was a movement within the production to not sensationalize Tolkien and to have faith with the book. And that seemed to work for them.
Yeah. I've got such an urge to rewatch them now. What do you think? Which version should I rewatch? Should I rewatch the cinema versions or the extended versions?
I suppose most people they blur in my head now about what's in what and what's in the other. I like the extended versions more because you get stuff I like, and I think especially I think Two Towers theatrical struggled a bit with its cut. And the extended edition is really good. It solves its problems. The extended edition of Two Towers, it brings in things and stretches out, and it becomes much more satisfying film. And you get things like in the extended edition of Return of the King, you get the death of Saruman. That kind of completes an arc in the story that feels important. So, but also you get Viggo Mortensen singing, and you get more of that kind of stuff. But I tend to want to watch the extended editions because at home you can relax into them, and there are just little notes and textured things that feel better. But I haven't watched the theatrical cuts for a long time, so it'd be interesting to remember what was in those, because it's like the gift giving sequence, Galadriel, and which is such an important part of the books. It sort of signifies all the characters and their destinies, and they cut that out of the theatrical version of Fellowship. And I was quite shocked at the time. Where's the gift giving? This is a moment I was waiting for, and it kind of feels right that it's in there in the extended edition. It makes sense, and there's various sort of plot points that it feeds that I think are important. But it's fighting with New Line over time.
I definitely prefer the Fellowship of the Ring. I think the theatrical version is just the pace is just so good, and that drives me. And it's like that thing of be careful what you wish for. So, for instance, when Orlando Bloom's zapping all the orcs with his amazing bow work in the extended version, it's just like maybe 3 kills longer than and it's just like it doesn't have the same impact. It should be more impressive, but it's actually at a certain point you start thinking, okay, this is a digital thing, or this is it's on the screen a little bit too long.
I get that, but I think there is a difference when you watch at home and you watch in the cinema.
Sure.
And, you can just pause it and go to the loo and come back, and it's all fine, or go make yourself a coffee, or you get some Kendall mint cake or whatever you need to get to the end of this thing. And I saw, it's one of the great privileges of doing it. When I went out to New Zealand and to see, they were doing supplementary on Two Towers. They showed us the extended cut of Fellowship in Jackson's cinema.
Wow.
And we sat with the cast. The cast had never seen it. And it's hilarious. I mean, they made so much noise. It was a bit irritating. Bernard Hill and I think Viggo Mortensen was sat behind me where I was sitting, and then just over to the right were Billy Boyd and Dominic Monaghan. Right. And there was this kind of dialogue going between Bernard Hill and the two hobbits. He was just sort of taking the mickey out of them. And it was obviously it's great because it was who they were and the kind of repartee. But you want to go, shh, I'm watching the film. For fuck's sake, Bernard Hill. Can you just shut up for a minute?
So you want to watch it twice. You want to watch it so you can enjoy it, and then you can watch it with the DVD commentary of Bernard Hill shouting at hobbits.
So Philippa Boyens tells a story that Jackson, when Del Toro was going to do The Hobbit, that Jackson brought him over and they came to New Zealand. They watched the Lord of the Rings films again on the big screen with just him, Del Toro and Jackson. Fran Welsh and Philippa Boyens just sat several rows back. And Fran Welsh and Philippa Boyens just took the mickey out of their own film so consistently, Jackson sent them out. They're just laughing. It's just like, what? And it's such a New Zealand thing. What did we do there? What were we thinking? Look at that scene. They were just mocking themselves.
That's so
laughing
funny.
Hysterically. And Jack said, look, this is not helpful. Can you please? Poor old.
We're supposed to be selling this.
Yeah, we're trying to bring him in and get him as part of the team, and you laughing at.
What a bunch of losers. Oh, brilliant. Well, listen, Ian, thanks so much for us, stopping by to chat some Ridley and some Tolkien. And some Jackson, obviously. It's been great.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk. It's a great series you've got going on. It feels like it's sort of really becoming something, and it's encouraging people to read. Read about film. It sounds obvious, but it's a really good thing to be doing. And
that's the best thing. And loads of people. Someone on Twitter today just tweeted Jason Bailey's book about New York has just arrived, Fun City Cinema, and I'm really looking forward to this. I've wanted to read this since I heard the podcast, and you just think. Brilliant! That's my job done.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're just getting great people.
Yeah,
the list of people. Julie Salomon, that's a great get. She's anyone who's written a film book. Devil's Candy is one of the kind of the sacred texts. It's kind of where you start, and it's interesting. Again, it was like Final Cut. It was a little bit of an inspiration for me looking at it for how do you write these books over the long haul. Except obviously, Bonfire of the Vanities went horribly wrong. There was no model of how a success story of a film. They didn't publish books about successes. You only publish books about disasters. Absolutely. So I think I'm one of the few books out there about a triumph.
But that was but I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed it it's so good to read it at a distance as well. I really felt that just having that perspective on it, because even when your book came out, you're saying, it's after The Hobbit and everything. So there's even a sense that it's almost a nostalgia. I'm beginning to get nostalgia. I mean, it's as you say, it's like 20 years ago. So it's
frightening. I've got photos of me on set that have been sort of taken. I look like a boy.
Yeah. No, I saw them in the middle of the book.
Honestly,
16 color illustrations.
The professional hardcore journalist at work having elf ears put on
with the helmet and the sword and stuff.
Oh yeah, honestly, but they encouraged it. It was these terrible New Zealanders. Come and sit in the throne, sit down. You're like, no, I'm meant to be on the job. Oh, this is great. I've come out of the theme park.
It's glowing with absolute. I remember doing the same thing with. We saw Solo at Cannes, and we went to the party afterwards, and they had these cutouts of the Millennium Falcon, and you could sit in, and me and another journalist were doing some sort of slightly rude poses and such, and I've still got those photographs. But despite the irony, you can still see a sort of fanboy gleam in my eye.
I know. It's terrible. You want to be professional at all times, and then they seduce you with their wonders.
But you also need to hold on to the magic, to the reason we do this in the first place. Because if you lose that cod professionalism, I think is a poor excuse, a poor replacement.
And the only thing I hoped I achieved was the sense of wonder I had that would have been shared by any of the people reading the book, that if they had experienced, they would experience it in a similar way to me. Just how extraordinary it all was. I mean, the memories are just fantastic. I have a great memory, and I think I put it in the book, of queuing up for catering, and there were two queues on both sides of the table, and Christopher Lee was directly opposite me in full Saruman makeup. The talons, the whole business. The beard was tied up in a net, and between us is a bowl. I think it was chili, steaming away, and he looks up at me, dead in the eye, and goes, "What is that?" And I'm like, "I think it's chili." And he sort of looks at, "Oh, chili. And sort of rubs his stomach. He goes, "I better not. On set this afternoon, on set." And off he goes. I think I've just had an interaction with Christopher Lee. Then it dawned on me, he thought I was catering. He just thought I was the catering man.
You were thinking, maybe he recognized me from the pages of Empire.
Yeah, I have this moment, me and Christopher Lee, the great Christopher Lee. I thought I was fucking catering. Then that just made me laugh. I thought, it's just the wonder of being here. It's just the joy of it all. Where else would that happen?
Just pop a napkin over your arm and go and see if he needs anything.
Yes.
Brilliant. Oh, wonderful stories. Wonderful stories. Well, let's do this again, Ian. We'll just
Absolutely.
We'll wait for another couple of months, a few films to come out, and it'd be
yeah, totally. We'll catch up post Christmas and see what we've been reading, what we've been watching.
So that was me and Ian talking about Ridley Scott, or Ian and I should say, talking about Ridley Scott, talking about The Last Duel, talking about Tolkien and Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Tintin, and Peter Jackson's documentary. So a whole bunch of stuff, really. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to thank Elliot Atkins for the music and Ali Howard for the art. And until the next episode, please take care.
Cue the fireplace and your favorite fall movie. There's nothing better than a cozy evening at home with a glass of First Leaf wine. First Leaf is a personalized wine club that delivers right to your door. Sounds magical, right? They get to know your favorite tasting notes, which varietals you enjoy, and whether you prefer sweet or dry wines. So in every shipment, you get bottles tailored to your unique palate. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/fall to get your first 6 wines for just $44.95 with free shipping.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.